Introduce then next Alexandra, one of our parents on the panel tonight.
My name's Alexandra. I've got a 13-year-old. I'm particularly interested in communication, physical health, self-esteem, self-confidence, happiness, and happiness in education. So I'm really excited to hear about positive psychology. And in my own work as a divorce lawyer, I hear a lot about sort of when things go wrong and toxic dynamics and so on. And I really believe as parents that there's loads we can do with this amazing city, Oxford, and the countryside. And there are so many things that we can do to sort of balance our children's needs. So that's who I am.
Thank you, Alexandra. And our next parent on the panel is actually online. So, Juliet, do you mind giving us a wave and then just introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Juliet. I have a 19-year-old daughter who went to Spires and has left now, and a 15-year-old son who's still at Spires. I'm generally very interested in what makes people tick and how children can sort of fulfil their potential and be happy. So I was happy to be involved with this project.
Thank you very much. And then we move on to our practitioners. So we're very delighted to have Miriam with us from Clear Sky Children's Charity, who will have read about in our, I'm pretty sure in our last newsletter, we had a little write-up about Clear Sky. So it's great for you to come and join us. Do you want to just say a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Miriam and I'm an art therapist on the Clear Sky therapy team. So I work in schools around Oxfordshire, doing one-to-one art therapy with young people. I'm also a practitioner of heart-to-heart programs, which are programs run by Clear Sky in schools to work with groups of parents and children together. And I also am a practitioner of parent-child attachment play, which is working with individual parents or with groups of parents without the child there. And the key idea behind all of this is the importance of play. And the importance of a child-led experience through which the child can get well-being and get close to the adults that are important to them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And then if I can also introduce Ali Tonks to you. Ali, can you give us a wave? Ali is also online this evening. So do you want to say a little bit about yourself as well, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Ali. I'm currently a trainee educational psychologist. Prior to doing this doctorate course, I was a teacher for 6 years in primary education, and in that time spent some time as the special educational needs coordinator and head of early years. And I'm now in my second year of 3 years of the doctorate in educational psychology. So I currently spend 3 days a week on placement with Oxfordshire EPS, and I live in Oxfordshire. And then 2 days a week I'm studying with the Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust. So 3 days sort of practical work, going into schools, doing lots of kind of observations and consultations with parents and teachers, and then some kind of individual work with children, finding out their views and their emotions, and sometimes a bit of cognitive assessment, and then really working collaboratively to try and promote kind of best outcomes for young people. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you ever so much. So thank you all, the panel. We're very grateful for giving up your time like this. We know that it's going to be really helpful for parents who watch this afterwards, and all the interesting topics that we're going to talk about. So we're going to begin. Alexandra, you had a question about how children develop, so kick us off.
Yes, just really, what should parents bear in mind? Secondary school children from a developmental point of view. What should we be very sort of clear about in terms of helping our children? And if our children could speak, our adolescents could speak, what would they be telling us to sort of do and don't do in that area, so sort of 11 to 18s?
Miriam, do you want to kick us off on that one, and then we'll come on to Ali after that?
Yeah, so it's a really important question because I think adolescence is a very unique time in somebody's life, and it's developed the way it has for evolutionary reasons. It's that transition between being a child and being closely attached within a family unit, and the necessity of having to grow up and find your place in your peer group. And no child of 8 or 9 would, they'd be happy to climb into bed and have a chat and do nice things together, go to the park. No adolescents are going to have those same, adolescents are not going to want that particular thing anymore. How are they going to leave that comfort and become an adult? What's the push that would actually push them away from that cosy base? So it's a real, puberty triggers it, and then the whole adolescence, which lasts into the 20s, is a process of realigning the attachment so that this peer group becomes far more important, and that's really where the future is as an adult. And leaving childhood behind and all the loss that entails. There's a lot of loss, and there's an unrealised, as yet, adulthood ahead. So there's a fantastic phrase that comes from D.H. Lawrence. He calls adolescence the hour of the stranger. And I think it's fantastic because parents can sometimes feel that they no longer recognise the child that they've lived all those years with, and the child also does hardly recognise themselves as well. So neurology research has now really identified adolescence as a very specific time of development, and it has this evolutionary purpose. Parts of the brain develop at different times, and that's one of the key difficulties that affect the relationships with adolescents. So it's a time of huge development of the social brain, and working out peer group relationships, trying to understand, getting attached to peers, feeling desperate when these relationships don't go well, feeling euphoric when they go well, a real sort of need to get very deeply immersed for biological reasons. They have to do this with the social world around them. And becoming engaged in issues, becoming political, becoming passionate about things. I mean, they're fantastic qualities. They also can be hurtful for parents because it's leaving the nest, or being ambivalent between leaving the nest and coming back to the nest. Actually, it's a kind of two-way process over those years. So the social brain is developing. The prefrontal cortex, which gives you skills of evaluation, decision-making, all those kind of things that we associate with more mature behaviours and mindsets, that's slower to develop. And so you have these different areas of development that are happening at different times. Another thing which is also relevant is the reward system. So dopamine, which is one of the chemicals released when you experience something pleasurable, the baseline goes down in adolescence. So adolescents are seeking dopamine release. And this partly explains the risk-taking behaviours of them, because they want to experience that dopamine. It's a chemical process, it's not a conscious process. When the dopamine is released, it's released at a higher rate, so they get more of a kind of pleasure from something. And this can be obviously things like drugs and alcohol and so on, but it can also be sport, and it can also be pleasurable activities. So there's changes in the chemicals of the brain which we need to be very sort of compassionate actually about teenagers, because they've got all these different things going on at the same time, some of which are developing quickly, some of which are developing slowly. And it is a period of turmoil, and I think it's there are very specific things which explain why teenagers behave the way they do. So they seek novelty, they seek creative exploration, they seek social engagement, and they process emotion in a very intense way. So there's a piece of research looking at how people respond to a neutral face, and it's found that teenagers will understand a neutral face as aggressive, whereas an adult and a child, both ends either side of the adolescent, will see that face as neutral. So the emotion is a lot more intense as well. So they've got a lot to deal with, I would
Absolutely
say.
reassuring,
Yeah.
sort of more than you. I always think it's almost like a second toddlerhood, because it like loads more sort of reassurance, and you can't take things for granted, because they're being really bright in some ways, but not so much.
Yeah.
in
I
others.
always think there's a book to be written there, toddlers and teenagers.
Yeah.
It is.
Because the impulse
Yeah.
control, as I say, and the risk-taking behaviours. You know, in toddlerhood, you learn to stand, you learn to walk and talk and those things, but you don't know you're going to fall on your backside. Whereas teenagers, we want them to experience that independence away from their parents.
Yeah.
And again, they wouldn't take that risk if they knew what was going to happen next.
Yeah.
But the emotional dysregulation, the highs and the lows, the slightly tantruming behaviour, the dictators and despots kind of attitude sometimes, very similar.
And it's important to release the stress all the way through, isn't it? That emotion, it's important not to clamp it down. I've heard people work with stress, let it go all the way through.
But also the questioning, the curiosity about the world peaks in those two bits, that neuroplasticity, that real, there's a reason we get students doing GCSEs, 8 different subjects with 4 different types of exam and 5 different types of questions in each. Their brains are like little sponges, toddlerhood teenagers.
And things like the sense of humour, the lovely things about teenagers, they are very funny.
Yes.
And, their cognitive abilities are, they're putting things together in a very creative way. This creative exploration, I think humour is a great example of.
And that probably goes into that whole gender identity as well, that plasticity you were talking about.
When you question everything.
Yeah.
I mean, challenge authority.
Themselves.
This is why we exist, is to challenge authority. You see a toddler, they're 2.5 foot high, and they can stand there to someone 6 foot tall, put their hands on their hips and say no, defiantly. And you've got to admire that. And you see the same in teenagers, that
it's a push against the establishment.
Push back.
It's this creative exploration. I mean, there's a little sort of guide to this, which is called Essence, that teenagers have essence. So ES is emotional spark.
Yes.
So that can mean they're also very moody and irritable on the one hand, but they're also, very engaging and, they feel things very strongly, they fall in love, and all these things like that. And then the next word is social engagement, so moving the attachment system being reactivated and moving more widely to move into the peer group and into society. And then N is novelty, which is the dopamine issue. They seek novelty and want to take risks and explore. And as a result, they achieve things in society. I mean, these are life skills that we all need.
And
And
how do
then
we help
creative
them fall in
exploration.
love with themselves? Because it's like that self-esteem and that self-acceptance I find so, it's such a sort of challenge. How am I looking, that sort of neuroticism and that sort of how they look. How do we help them build that?
It's a difficult time, and I think we do need to be really compassionate about them, and there's a lot of turmoil to be coped with along the way.
It's a very fragile balance, isn't there? I see it with my own daughter, but also with the children I work with, that wanting to conform, that wanting to fit in, to be part of the herd. I want the likes, I want to be normal, I want to be average, but there's also that slightly inner rebel that I want to be different, I want to be unique, I want to challenge this, and it's a very weird balance that you've got to teenagers, it's a tricky balancing act between I'm happy with who I am and do you know what, I hate who I am, and sometimes it can fluctuate even within an hour.
I mean, the point is that just one more point about this, when you're talking, you mentioned tantrums, and then I think this is sometimes we kind of describe it as attachment-seeking behaviours. And the attachment system is there for survival. A baby adapts to its caregiver. As Winnicott said, there's no such thing as a baby. There's only a baby and a carer. They are absolutely, it's essential for survival for the baby to adapt in whatever way the parents them. And so this, it's essential and a matter of survival for a teenager to be accepted in the group. We're social animals, and it's the biggest disaster. So I think the importance of attachment, and then when you're saying how do we do this, I think it is through working with the attachment systems.
So they're not actually attention seeking, they're connection seeking.
Yes.
They're going, look at me,
Yeah.
see me, hear me. There is something I want to express. There is a need under the behaviour. And it's, I suppose, trying to work out what that need is.
It's a need for closeness, isn't it?
And the parents got to sort out, you know, if the parent's triggered by the behaviour, you've got to look after the child first and park it and talk to them when they're calm, because unless apparently you do this with men as well, it's only worth chatting when they're sort of in a resourceful state, you know, otherwise wasting your time.
Yeah.
Ali, can I bring you in this, because I feel we've kind of left you a little bit out of the conversation over there on the screen. So do you want to chip in on this and take the opportunity just now?
Yeah, I think Miriam has covered loads of really helpful points there. I guess the main thing to me, it kind of sounds obvious, but when you're a teenager, your appearance is almost of an adult. And so sometimes the expectations there are to be like an adult. You know, you've got a lot of pressure, particularly towards the end of secondary school, where you're really making decisions that could affect your career and what you go on to do. So there's a lot of pressure going on, but at the same time, you've got all of those developmental and hormonal changes going on that are taking a long time. And, you know, the prefrontal cortex isn't developed until about the age of 25. So even once you've got to that university age, you're not a fully developed adult in terms of your brain development. And I think that can be so easily forgotten by adults and younger people. So I think that's worth considering. And also there's a lot of statistics out there at the moment about mental health in adulthood, and around about 3/4 of all mental illness is developed before the age of 24. So it is a period of vulnerability, really. You know, there's all sorts of reasons as to why that is, and the research is, you know, there's nothing conclusive to say this is what might cause that mental illness. It's a whole range of biological, social, environmental factors, but I think it's really useful just to know all of that kind of information about an adolescent brain and try as best you can to stay in that battle, to kind of be involved and let them know that you're there, even if they are going off and they will want to be with their peers for a lot more of their time, which, as Miriam has said, it's a survival kind of instinct that comes very natural, but they will still need you. And yeah, I don't think that ever stops even beyond the age of 25. I can definitely say I still need my mum and dad. So just letting them know that they're there, so that if they do have difficulties, they can come and talk to you about it as and when. Yeah, I think there's a lot going on for them, and particularly at the moment with, you know, social media is just such a huge aspect of their lives, and naturally you're becoming a lot more aware of your self-image and how your peers are viewing you. So yeah, it's definitely a tough time of life. I would not want to go back to being an adolescent.
Absolutely. One of the joys I think about working in schools, I'm sure Claire about this stuff, is that you see those lovely journeys year on year. You know, we've got 1,300 kids at this school, and having been doing this job now for a fair few years, you just have that reassurance that I've seen loads of kids come in year 7 and go mad around somewhere about year 8 or 9, and you think, what's wrong with you? What's gone wrong? What's happened to you? And then, you know, school punitive systems seem to be very much based on bad behaviour. You know, these very words like bad, good. You know, good behaviour, good reward points, and you're a bad person, you've done something bad. And we forget too easily all of this stuff. Well, that's them taking risks, trying something new, trying something novel. It's a stupid idea, but they have to do it because that's part of what they're going through. But then we see them transfer through the other side. And by the time they get to year 10 and 11 and into the sixth form, they're delightful people that you'd happily spend time with, in your private time. We get the benefit of that, and I found myself quite a lot talking to parents who are really pulling their hair out about the kids saying, it's okay. Give him 2 more years and he'll sort himself out, and do you know what? 9.5 and 9.9 times out of 10 it's true, and they do get there. I know it doesn't seem like it at the time. I've certainly said to my kids once, one of the funniest things they ever said to me, I had a bit of a moment. They were being a very childish. Why do we use that word? Because when I said to them, why are you behaving so childlike? And they said, because we're children. And, it reminded me beautifully, oh yeah, you are. So what's interesting is the next question we're going to invite Juliet to broach. We've talked lots about, if you like, acknowledging that change and that period of testing and growth. But as a parent, when you want to lay down some kind of barriers, and so things like screen habits, then how do we go about that? And still at the same time as giving that space for growth. So Juliet, do you want to go ahead with your next question?
So I was just interested what people thought about the challenge of screens today, because especially with most people having a smartphone when they go into secondary school, or at least soon into, it's a lot harder to kind of monitor, and I think it's important for children to have time, obviously away from their screen, to actually kind of rest, relax their brains. And I think there's so much time now is spent kind of actively communicating in one way or another that we've sort of forgotten to have time to just daydream and let our brains kind of drift off. So I just wondered what people felt about trying to set kind of boundaries at home in terms of screen time. If anyone, what people thought about that, because it's certainly one of the things I find most tricky at home. There's a very strong compulsion for children to be on their phones, and it's kind of trying to set out kind of reasonable boundaries for that, really, what people thought about that.
Great. Ali, do you want to, if we stay online, if you want to start off on that one, please?
Yeah, I think it's such an important question to be thinking about for young people and for adults. I think we could probably all admit how attached we are to our phones. And I think in setting reasonable boundaries, it's useful to reflect on your own use of phones and iPads and all other electronic devices, and perhaps if some boundaries are put in place, then the importance of modelling that for them. So, for example, if you decide that at meal times the phones will be in another room, that includes the adults as well, or deciding that the phones will stay downstairs and won't be in their rooms when sleeping is occurring, because we all know how difficult it can be once you have that white light and you're trying to get to sleep. That light will be telling your brain that it's daylight and you don't need to be getting tired. So yeah, I think having those discussions all together and having a think about what would be reasonable. And I think it links quite nicely with what we were talking about in terms of adolescents wanting that peer engagement and why that's so important for them. And it's useful to reflect on how that would be for a young person if, I don't know, you think of a scenario where they're all WhatsApping each other and discussing something really important to them, and then the dinner's put on the table and, you ask them to put the phone down and not contribute to that conversation, how that would be for them, and to empathise and have that conversation as to why it's important to pause sometimes. And yeah, I think just having really, really clear rules around it so that everyone is understanding everyone's thoughts, and then sticking with whatever you have decided. And the other thing which I definitely find I struggle with is having trying to do one task, and then, you know, even right now my phone is right here. If I get a message, you know, my attention is probably going to be diverted to it, so I'm just as susceptible to it. But having that kind of conversation with young people about, you know, when they're doing their homework, have they got their phone there? What does it mean? Does it take them half an hour to do a 10-minute piece of homework if they're constantly being distracted? And I think helping them to realise why that's quite a difficult thing to manage at an early age, so that they can then kind of get those expectations set in to help promote healthy habits into adulthood as well.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, that's really, yeah. I think the modelling is quite key, and I always kind of say that it's the challenges for all of us in terms of screen use. You know, yeah.
It's not just kids, is it? My 13-year-old daughter, a few weeks back, they'd been talking about this in school, and so she announced over dinner one night, I think we should have a no screens day every Tuesday. And I don't know who got the most. And you know what, we've tried it, so we've had no electronics actually. She went further, not just no screens. So phones, computers, anything like that. So every Tuesday, we come home, we have our meal, and then we've been dusting off all the board games and card games and things like that, and it's been really quite nice. But you're right, I think I found it harder. And there's a twitch, isn't there? You know, 5 minutes into something, you feel your hand going, I wonder who's emailing me. Especially teachers, I think, we're always looking to see what the head's asking us to do. So
I think it's to do as well with the dopamine that you were talking about earlier. That's what our phones give us. It's that quick, it's like eating a sweet in a chocolate bar. It's colourful, it's bright, it gives you that instant whoa burst. But it's not like, I don't know, savouring a nice piece of cake, which is the serotonin, isn't it? It's the pondering over an afternoon tea. And that's a good book, that's a walk outside, that's a creating a piece of art. And it's trying to model. I've got a 12-year-old, we have this conversation all the time, and I try and explain to her, you get it, it's the hit, you're after the hit, that's the hand twitch. You're just reinforcing that, ooh, dopamine, quick fix, I look, I check, I get a like, quick fix. Let's put that down, let's go and get something a little bit more healthier for your brain. Let's get that longer lasting good feeling. Let's go for a walk. Let's go and play with the dog. Let's go and create a piece of art together. Let's go and read a book. And you get that longer lasting feeling of satisfaction. It's trying to talk to them like a diet. Are you going to just binge on these quick sweets that give you this sugar rush? Or are you going to actually enjoy something that gives you longer lasting well-being and happiness? And again, it's an ongoing conversation in my household, but actually given the choice, we talk about, well, would you rather sit down and we all play a board game together, or go for a walk on the river, or would you rather sit and kind of be on your screen? And actually lockdown has become quite an interesting thing, because my daughter and her teenage friends, talking to them, they actually dislike screens quite a lot at the moment. They dislike that interaction with a computer screen. They're craving people, because they had that disconnect during lockdown. And actually, when given the choice, actually, do you want to sit and talk on your phone and go on Instagram, go on whatever, or shall I walk you around to your friend's house? Should we go down the park? Which would you rather have? The choice is usually actually people, but she won't think of that first. She'll go for the quick dopamine shot.
I think it's really those activities that you're talking about, like playing a board game, going for a walk. The other thing that's happening with social media is the anxiety. There's the dopamine of the attraction of it and the seductiveness of the screen and so on, and the sort of feeling that you've got enough likes and so on. But there's also this, anxiety. Am I accepted? Am I in the group? And so to calm that anxiety, these kind of activities, that's also helpful, I think. And like you said, Ali, I think it's joint conversations and acknowledging that they'll be disappointed if they have to have supper.
There's really
communication is huge in this, yeah.
There's a really good app that's free, you can download, called Forest. It's either A Forest or The Forest or just Forest. And the idea of the app is that you pick a tree, you click go, and then the idea is you don't touch your phone. Your tree starts to grow, and the longer you leave the phone, the bigger your tree grows. And as soon as you lift the phone and do something with it, your tree dies. Right? And you can join a group, you can get your friends to contribute, and you can grow a forest together. And it's like you agree to do this because if one of you picks up your phone, then everybody's tree dies. And they've also, I can't remember, there's a charity who sponsor it. And once you've grown enough trees, obviously, you level up and you get better trees, the more trees you grow. But also, when you've reached a certain amount of points, this charity plants a real tree. So, you're also doing something for the environment. So, it's a really great, I always bring it out on revision time with the Year 11s as a way of encouraging them to put their phone down and do some revision. But there's no reason why it can't become a bit of a friendly competition at home as well. So that's worth looking out for. Let's move on because I'm conscious of time. We've got 8 questions. We've got to the second one, which is great because we're really enjoying these questions. I think we might have to leave some, but that's okay. That gives us something to do next time. So, Alexandra, let's go back to you. You asked a question about resources.
Yes, it's kind of the flip side of the bad side of screens in terms of available resources in our wider area, whether they be physical or mental or sort of television. I mean, like educationally, I've been sort of switched on to BBC Bite Size, which is amazing, and then looking when renewing my TV channels, I've put in all these geography and documentaries. And when I work as a mediator with couples, I try and get them to focus on goal setting and a positive vision for the children and thinking about who their role models are and what their interests are. And then you can make things really bespoke. You can watch Wimbledon and have the strawberries and get excited and have that whole sort of mental experience. So with the theme being how to sort of help parents and adolescents be the best they can be. What resources do people think are really going to nourish them in any of the spheres of their life, social, physical? I'm merging a few questions together, Maurice.
That's fine, that's good.
Yeah, socially, physically, mentally, everything, so that we've got a holistic approach to get their mental health as positive as it can be.
Thank you. Very good, Joanne.
That's quite a big question.
I know.
I guess I was considering this question more on a sort of from a slightly different perspective. That your question goes with my 5 top tips question.
Yeah.
Just on join them all together. That's fine.
Okay. So just briefly on sort of resources. I mean, because we worry about our children so much, and we worry: is this happening? Is that happening? I think it's really useful to have resources to look at, podcasts to listen to, information to access. And what I found really helpful, because it is addressed to, on the one hand, it's addressed to schools, but also to parents and also to young people, is the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families. So they have a whole programme called Schools in Mind. They have different sections on their website for parent carers and also for young people themselves. And there's little podcasts on topics that might make us anxious about our adolescents. Information. It's very accessible and it's small amounts of information. It's reassuring to have the research pulled together and to have practical suggestions made. So I find that Anna Freud Centre, it's easy to search. And I think that the young people section, it gives them access to helplines and so on, but it also is very kind of understanding and compassionate. And I think that that might be helpful for young people. A book that I've read, which I think is really helpful, it's by Philippa Perry. and it's called The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read.
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
I had that ready as well.
It's Grace and Perry's partner. What I like about this is when she talks about having difficult conversations about screen time, about going out, times to come back, she is very upfront about the parents saying, well, I am not ready to let you stay out till midnight because I feel too anxious about you being out until midnight. And for my own well-being, we need to sort something out so that I can survive this. Rather than saying, why do you want to go out and you can't do this, can't do that. It's kind of, it brings the parent in a very honest way into all the anxieties that teenagers might be feeling in a different way. You know, in the end, you're talking to a teenager, we're two human beings trying to find a way to live together well and to feel attached and close to each other and to help each other. And it's quite a funny book as well. But I think it's really refreshing, and I would recommend. Well, after I've thrown it on the floor, I would recommend it to parents and family. Actually, it's great. So the Clear Sky, they have these programs in schools, so you can have parents groups in school looking at play, and they also have a action play book with ideas of what you do. It's things you can do with your child in this time where you've said no screens, or at any point. And an idea of helping with attachment is that we would spend maybe 20 minutes a week, so not a big amount of time, but just some very focused time with one child. So if you have more than one child, you could be just going with one child at a time. Try and set a time for it and just do something that is child-led. Doesn't involve any technology, doesn't involve any homework or educational tasks. There's lots of little ideas. One that teenagers, in my experience, seem to really like is, and it's just an example to kind of show you, is that you draw a picture and you don't show them the picture, and then you tell them, and then they've got a piece of paper, and then you tell them how to draw the picture. So you say there's a line going up in the middle of the page, and there's a circle on the top, and you don't tell them it's a bicycle, you just tell them where the lines go. And it's a way of sort of mentalising, which is another of the big tasks of adolescence, is imagining what another person is thinking, because that's how we also get close and how we kind of tune in with each other. So doing activities that are simple and that involve just you and your child individually on a regular basis, I think is a really good idea. But the prerequisite for that, which is the 5 tips, is actually, as a parent, your own headspace. So it's self-care for us as parents comes before solving screen time, bedtimes, and things like that. So being careful with yourself, giving yourself self-care.
They need you to be well, don't they?
Yeah.
And I think, I love things like Deepak Chopra, mindfulness, meditation, sort of dancing, and I wish my sort of son would do them. Of course he doesn't, but he picks up on that I'm doing that. He sees it doing me good. So he got into that Joe Wicks, and and then he gets, the exercise is making me feel good. I think it's so important. They literally say, don't they, I need you to be well. If you're well, they're well. And if you're anxious, they pick it up immediately, and I'm really seeing that connection. Lots of friends, not me actually, I've got the anxiety. I've got several friends on antidepressants, and what they're saying is they're reducing the anxiety, and I wasn't aware that anxiety is sort of so epidemic, and it's sort of like, well, what are we going to do about just feeling better and calmer? Because I really believe in those sort of mirror neurons and well-being actually being contagious.
I think you're co-regulation. Yeah. And this is what happens when you spend one-to-one time with your child. I think the anxiety and the headspace, what you can do with that is, when you give yourself headspace, is to think about the child. So there's your own stress and your own anxiety and your own work and lockdown and everything. But if you can find a space through being nice and caring to yourself, so you can really hold the child in your mind and just have them in your mind, just focus on them. That's the prerequisite for all of these conversations and the other things that follow, because it's the attachment.
I saw a lovely picture the other day that said, was it don't go into their storm, bring them into your calm.
Yes.
Which I just like the idea of sitting and breathing.
Yeah.
Me and my daughter have occasionally just sat back to back.
Yes.
So she
Yes,
doesn't have the
nice.
thing of actually having to look at me.
Yeah.
But she knows now.
Yes.
And we just breathe. If we're both anxious, we just breathe and we talk. But she's not having to look at me, there's no confrontation. I'll tell you something we found really useful as well, was a book, just a plain exercise book. She would write in it and put it under my pillow, and I'd write back and I'd put it under her pillow. We wouldn't talk about it, ever, but it was communication, and she could write anything and I wouldn't judge. I could write anything, and it was a form of communication. Even when everything was going wrong and she really didn't want to talk to me, she would write in the book. And I have to say, it's probably my number one parenting kind of thing, is just keep that one line of communication.
Yeah.
That is your past, that you can write anything in there, and it's okay.
And on that topic, morning pages is such a valuable exercise, so, for parents, for children, just write down whatever's in your head, first thing, chuck it in the bin, because usually the answers are deep down. You just got to sometimes get through the rubbish.
So that book, that's a free download, I believe, on the website.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Which is clear-sky.org.uk. So when we put the video up, we'll also put the link to that, to the book that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And Ali, I know you were kind of backing up the book that we saw earlier. Did you have a few other resources and books that you wanted to mention as well?
Yeah, I had two other books that I was going to share that perhaps focus a little bit more on the neuroscience side, but in an easy to digest format. So Brainstorm by Daniel Siegel is a great one if you want to learn more about the adolescent brain and what it goes through and kind of strategies to support adolescents through that. And then the Whole Brain Child is another book by Daniel Siegel. It's again really easy and accessible read, and this one is just full of different strategies to support a child's developing mind. I would also recommend a text line service called Shout, which I feel like every single person, young person or adult, should have the number in their phone. So if you haven't heard of it, Shout is a charity. It's a text line that's a little bit like Samaritans, but it's all done over text message, so you don't have to have that verbal dialogue. And it was interesting, as Claire was just talking about the notebook and the communicating, and yeah, I think probably the fact that you're not in the same room when you're writing it, that probably makes a huge difference in what is shared. And that's great that you have that set up. Sometimes you may feel like your child is struggling on that level of communication as well. So if they have the text line number, which is 85258, then they can just text that. They're linked up with a trained volunteer. I volunteer on the service, so I can say what it's like from my side. And most of our texters are young people that feel like they've got no one else to go and talk to. And a lot of them feel like they're wasting our time, and we will be there just to listen. And we also have a whole wealth of resources on there, so we can kind of signpost or encourage a young person to reach out to someone that they trust, or maybe go and speak to a GP. So there will always be that support given to them. And just a few other ideas and activities which I think are always useful ones is tracking mood. So on a scale of positive to negative, just every day, maybe a few times a day if you can, just stop and notice how you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And then I used to do it on Post-it notes. So I'd have a block of Post-it notes, I'd draw a line and mark where I was, and then do it on a new Post-it every time. And then it's quite cool because you can flick through it, like those old style sort of cartoon things, and see where your mood flicks to over time. Mm-hmm. But when I did that for myself, I really noticed that if my mood was lower, I often said that I was tired. And it seems so obvious that I hadn't noticed until I'd logged it each day. And I did that activity with a young person, and I'll always remember she said she hadn't realised how often she was happy, and she was perceiving that she was unhappy most of the time. But when she could flick through her book, she could see that actually most of the time she was having fun and getting along with people. And our brains are wired to have more focus on the negative. And so it's a really nice way to kind of draw into positives or notice what makes you feel good and what makes you feel less good. And then you can develop, what you do to suit that. And that's why doing a sort of positivity journal or writing what you're grateful for is all reasons to try and push your brain into the more positive side to counteract that bias that we have into the negative. And just on a really broad level, I think don't forget that you as parents are an amazing resource. You've got your whole lifetime of experiences, and I'm sure your children will value you as a resource, and schools as well. So schools are doing more and more about mental health. I'm doing my thesis at the moment on mental health leads in schools, and it is amazing how much work is going on in primaries and secondaries around supporting mental health. So I think if you have any concerns, never hesitate to get in contact with a school, and they'll always be happy to support you around mental health as well.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. That's a wealth of information. And so what we'll try also do is pull out some of those key resources and put them on the website as well. It's good to get quick, easy access to those. We're always looking for good things to put on a website. It's very bare, but we want it to be like a library. So, and the sections there for parents, for teachers, for practitioners. So this has been fantastic. We can feed the website. Julia, there were a couple of questions you had that I think joined quite nicely together. One was about, both about kind of, I guess, monitoring and controlling is the wrong word, influencing maybe
I was
our
just
children's
so
behaviour.
interested to know what people thought. When I was growing up with my brother and sister, we were given a lot of freedom, to go out for a whole day. And I think these days, people, possibly parents, are more kind of anxious about letting their children have sort of freedom. And with kind of mobile phones, possibly there's more of an inclination to have your children kind of phone you, at different times during it, to check that they're okay. And I just wondered what people thought about that in terms of a child's development, and whether it is actually important to allow them to have the freedom to phone you if they are feeling worried, but not if things are okay, if that makes sense. Just wondered what people thought about that.
So is that worrying about disempowering? Is it the aspect of worrying about disempowering your child?
Sorry, I can't hear.
So was your question about the concern about disempowering young people?
Yeah, I just kind of wondered what people thought about that, the change that there's been in terms of freedom for children, and whether you thought it was important to, allow them that freedom to enable them to sort of develop, independence and so forth.
Because we've witnessed, there's been loads of lovely phrases, hasn't there? There was the helicopter parents idea that are always flitting around checking. Then there was the lawnmower parents, where you're taking all the difficulties away so they don't get hurt. So I guess we're in that continuum of total freedom to make all of these mistakes that you should be making because you're developing that way, and us as a parent controlling that in some measure. And I think the two things you talked about were monitoring where they are so that you know they're safe, and also routines like getting up in the morning. How much should how much should we influence that and help them build good habits? So
I could just say something on the sleep. So during adolescence, one of the characteristics of adolescence is a change in sleep patterns.
Yeah.
So there's a later sleep onset and a need for more sleep. So this kind of also puts a context around the picture of young people being up very late and then sleeping early, and whether we think that's a bad habit and they ought to go to bed early and get up early. We're sort of fighting against a physiological situation. Although, you know, things are never completely, that doesn't mean they can necessarily sleep all day. But there is an underpinning, there's a physiological underpinning for the changes that we see in adolescence.
So, and the difficulty is, do we just let that happen? Or do we try and steer it in some way? I think that's the tricky part, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said for, you know, a young person's increasing need to have their own space. You know, bed is also their own space. And you know, just stepping back and allowing them to have a bit more space, and not necessarily to have to be busy with all the things that the family wants to do, the rest of the family or younger siblings might want to do. So I think it's the same thing as, you know, communication and sharing your anxieties, you know, with them as well. It's a learning curve together. And I think that applies to quite a lot of the conflict areas.
That's really interesting. That's a whole, do you know, that's a new thing for me, that whole idea that we're not talking about you, my kid, so they're not feeling got at and that they've got it wrong, but what you're doing affects me this way. And if we go back to what you said earlier, if they feel we're in a good place, they'll be in a good place. So they're a bit worried because their behaviour is worrying us, maybe they'll do something about it in some sense without us being controlling and over them. So
I think there is room for a bit of sense of humour.
Yeah.
Because I just think that opens them up to talking. So I realise they're sort of anxious and you're like, look, everything you're worried about has happened a million times for me. But if you sort of make a joke of it about that anxiety, because I realise that overprotectiveness. And, you know, so I make a joke of all the things I would like to happen if he's accosted. And, you know, and then we laugh about it. But I've also really benefited from saying, I would do di-da, this is right for me, but what's right for you? So suddenly I've got that distance. He doesn't have to do what I do, but I'm saying what I would do and what would suit me, but then saying what's right for you. And really having that clarity is actually helpful for me as well as for him, I've noticed.
I found actually making sure.
Speak up.
I found making sure that my daughter had her kind of 5 safe people. You know, as we talk about with younger children, that they have safe adults. I think it's almost even more important as they become teenagers for them to hear different adult voices and to have a different form of communication. So they know there are certain adults in their life that they can go to get a non-emotional perspective. Yes, your parent and you may be at loggerheads about this, but you can go and have a rational conversation with your tutor that you get on really well with, or you can go and have that with your aunt or your uncle or your grandparent, and it's just making them aware of, you know, it's not just this argument with the parent, you have other adults, you have other people, and that communication.
That's a really good idea.
Ali, do you want to come in this one as well?
Yeah, it's the sound is on and off a bit, so I'm sorry if I repeat something that you have said. I think with the sleep, it is such a tricky one, and the adolescent period for sleep is just really tricky to manage, and actually the school system is very counterproductive to the amount of sleep that adolescents need. You know, a lot of young people are getting up at maybe 7, perhaps before then, to catch buses and get into school for 8:30 starts. And that does mean that a lot of adolescents aren't getting the amount of sleep that they need. So the recommended amount for an adolescent is 9 hours. But also because of the changes in the brain, they're not actually usually able to sleep before 11 p.m. So then if you do the maths on that, they're not getting that amount of sleep. And the research around sleep suggests that you can't really catch up on that sleep at a later point. And the other factor to consider is circadian rhythms, and that if you get up and go to bed at similar times, then your body will become used to that. So that then adds another dilemma on a weekend, whether you try and stick to a regular routine or do you let them sleep in and let them get perhaps that 9 hours that they want. So I think it is about balance and having those conversations, which I think has already been said. But maybe planning in some really lovely activities that might get them up, bacon cooking on a Saturday morning, or going out for a coffee or something that they perhaps like, just so that they're not perhaps sleeping in until lunchtime, and then their circadian rhythm is just going to get even more out of whack. But it definitely is a challenging area to contend with.
Lovely. So Alexandra, you had a really interesting question, which was a kind of an anti-question, I guess. But I won't say it for you. Do you want to just pose it?
What question would you most like to have been asked today? And please answer that question.
Can't really hear you, Alex.
So the question was, what question would you wish parents would ask you, and then answer the question.
What questions do you wish
what
parents would ask?
what question as a practitioner? I guess it's that, which one's burning on your mind? Things that, if only every parent knew this one thing, and asked us the information, and then I guess took the information seriously, would make such a big difference. So what's the kind of the burning question you wish parents were asking you? Who wants to
I think for me, there would firstly be no such thing as a silly question. So I think any question is a good question. I think it's really important to ask if there's anything you're not too sure of, or to have discussions, because often there isn't a black and white answer to these things. When I was reflecting on this before, I think I was very aware of how much different kind of patterns of behaviour can pass down generations, and so I'm not sure what the question would be that you would ask, but I guess I think it's just so important for parents to just stop and reflect on kind of what childhood and upbringing you have had, and what that means to you. What does that mean for you as a parent? What are you bringing to being a parent? And it sounds like you're already doing that, because we've mentioned a few times about thinking about your own anxieties and what that means for how you bring up your children. But I think often that's an area which is much harder to speak about, and I think that taps into sometimes people will feel like there's a stigma towards mental health, and it is hard to talk about, and it's even harder to then go up those generations and think about parent mental health, or even grandparents' mental health, because it definitely wasn't spoken about when grandparents were bringing up parents. So I think that's a really crucial thing just to reflect on.
How to change those cycles. Lovely. Maria, what would yours be?
I'd understood the question differently, and I was thinking it was related to what question would you most want a young person to ask? But my answer is exactly the same as Ali's, because it's we were all teenagers. How was our teenager experience, and what would we have wanted to ask our parents? What's the real question we would have wanted to know? And that can give us a clue to what's happening between us and our children.
Yeah, just as a mediator, you see a lot of cycles from grandparents. So I would say, sort your own stuff out. If you've got stuff, sort it out, because it will be being replicated.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly working with, at the extreme ends, children who've suffered abuse. We know at schools that often that's generational. You know, abuse breeds abuse through the generations, and stopping it, once it breaks, it changes it for generations to come. We know. So, you know, absolutely. So it's good to see that that's actually not just at the extreme ends, but in everything, all of those little habits. Okay, so if we finish with one more question, I think we've just got one left, which is Julia, you had a question about eating habits and...
Oh, yeah, that was something another parent passed on to me to ask. Just whether there were any particular things you would suggest parents look out for in terms of signs that there are kind of problems with eating. Any sort of particular warning signs you would be looking out for that parents should then think, well, actually, maybe this is something I need to seek support for, or, you know, have some concern for, and yeah.
Ali, do you want to pick up first?
Yeah, I will start off by saying, yeah, it's such a complicated area, and we could probably do the whole session on speaking.
Sure.
So there's a really great website called beateatingdisorders.org, and I would recommend, if anyone has any concerns, then to go and check out that website. There's so many resources on there aimed at professionals, parents, young people. So definitely go and have a look on that. I think the other thing with an eating disorder to be aware of is that it is a mental health condition, and so some of the changes, they're not always necessarily physically obvious, and so I would say the main thing to be looking out for are changes in behaviour, but they could happen really slowly over a long time, and so it can be quite difficult to spot, and it can also be quite different depending on the eating disorder. So, for example, anorexia might be an avoidance of meal times, kind of always having an excuse of why they're not hungry or they've already eaten or something. Maybe with bulimia, you might see that they disappear after a meal time, for example. So I think just having a notice over patterns over time, and just monitoring it. I think if there are any concerns, then it's important to bring it up in a conversation, and that can be very difficult. So I think if that is something that a parent is thinking about doing, then it's useful to just really think about the best way of doing that, really carefully thinking about how you're going to say it. And a lot of eating disorders start from a mental health need, such as anxiety or wanting control. So it might not be that you come out and say, I'm worried about your eating, why haven't you had your dinner? It might be more, I just wondered if you had anything on your mind that you wanted to talk about, or, I've just noticed this, I'm here if you want to talk. And they may not, but then just gently keeping those, again, lines of communication open so that they're there. It's another reason that, something like a shout text line, if someone texted in about that, then lots of signposts could be given. So those would be my main pointers, but definitely check out that Beat Eating Disorder website.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think that is really good. That covers it really. So now I was just going to say that to sort of try and be be bigger than the anxiety. Whatever the child will have anxiety if they're developing this, they will have anxiety. Just to try and contain their own anxiety, contain your own anxiety. And sort of just be bigger than the anxiety, and sort of bigger and kinder, and just there's a lot of I think I agree. Talking and communication is so important, and because the referral times are so long, I think there's a really big space for parents to be, while they're waiting for an appointment, there's a lot that, to be done in support and to be keeping talking about it, keeping the communication lines about anxiety open. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. So we'll certainly put that website as well on. If you go to our website, which is oxonnhwb.net, we've got some I need help now sections. So I think that's an important website we could put on that set of links as well. So we've gone over time a little bit, but that's okay. I feel we could have talked for another hour. I felt I've had to cut through a little bit, which I apologise for. But I think we've covered so much ground, and I'm really, really grateful. I can't say thank you enough to Juliet and to Alexandra for being brave enough and willing enough as parents to come and share the questions and the concerns with us. And then to Ali and to Miriam for their fantastic insight and the knowledge that they bring. And for me, it's that security of knowing it's somebody who really knows their business and really has examined this in detail and gives us really good advice that we know will work when we try it out with our children. So I think this has been a wonderful start to the idea, to the project. The next stages for the network are that we would like to have our conference in the autumn. I think we've got about 18 speakers lined up and all sorts of wonderful topics. And we had to postpone it because the regulations changed, and we decided the most important part of that network meeting was the networking. And if somebody comes up and speaks for 5 minutes, what you really want to do is afterwards go and have a chat to them at the breakout sessions and ask them for more information and connect with people that you think will be helpful. So we'll do that properly in September, all being well, provided there's no other reasons why we can't get together in person. So we'll fix a date for that soon and get that out. Please come along if you can. It's open to anybody in the area, teachers, practitioners, parents, anybody who's interested in looking after the mental health and well-being of all of our young people. So if there was an audience, I would ask them to applaud. Thank you all very, very much. And we look forward to seeing you another. I forgot to thank Claire, sorry, for helping us along in the conversation as well and bringing her insight to the team. So thank you very much. We'll let you go upon your evening and we look forward to seeing you another time. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.